last time I was in Finland was actually when I was touring with Bruce on the Chemical Wedding tour. That was actually the first and last time I've been in Finland. So
exactly, yes, I saw you playing there.
Really?
Yeah, I was at the Tampere show.
Okay, so and what were you like 15 then or something? Or?
I think I was. That's a good question. I was maybe. This was in '98, right?
Yes, that sounds
like
about right.
So I think I was maybe 17 or 18 or something like this.
Okay.
17 maybe. I'm not sure, but yeah.
Okay, well, I think I was 33 at the time, so
exactly.
A lot of time has passed since then.
Yeah, exactly. So you said you are still doing a lot of live shows with the
Yes, I've been actually about a year after I parted ways with Bruce and Adrian when they rejoined Maiden. I joined an Irish rock band, Young Dubliners, thinking I was going to give it a year or two, and here it is, almost 25 years later, and I'm still playing Irish rock. You know, it's been a fun gig. It's not nearly as high profile as the Dickinson gig, but it's been steady work. You know, paying the bills. So
you're doing a lot of gigs. I take it at least that's how I kind of like got the picture that there's a lot of gigs going on with that band.
Yeah, we work. I don't know exactly how many gigs a year, but easily over 100. When we were younger, we were working like most of the year, probably 200 and something shows a year. Now it's probably more like 100 and something. I don't know. I don't really keep track, but.
Yeah, I basically haven't heard much of you. Like, like I'm basically living in the kind of like a metal community, but after like those Bruce albums, which are basically very dear to me, and after that, I haven't been hearing much of you, like being around. So I guess.
Well, yeah, I'm not really part of the metal world anymore. So if you're not, if the metal world is where you dwell, then you're not gonna be running into me.
Yes, exactly. That's why it's also like super interesting to meet you and talk to you about these things, because like as I said, like I basically started my drumming learning to play your beats on the Chemical Wedding album. So it's cool to hear your takes on the things, and which I'm really interested to hear about.
Yeah, it's been nice to what's it been, like over 20 years since Chemical Wedding came out, and
yes,
obviously when you're in the thick of making a record like that, you can't really. There's no way of knowing whether it's going to stand the test of time or not. I mean, I knew that material was strong when we were recording it, but there's no way of really knowing how. Like I say, whether it's going to stand the test of time. So here it is, over 20 years later, and I've been hearing from a lot of people, especially when the Chemical Wedding, I think it was the 20-year anniversary a few years back, and that's when I really started hearing people talk about it and just say that record was really, influential for me, and it still sounds as good as it did back then. And that was when I first started realizing, wow, maybe I actually played on a record that might have some, longevity to it. Maybe when I'm dead and gone, there's more. The next generation of metal fans will be discovering that stuff. So it's good to know.
I believe that's the case. Like I keep returning to these albums, like both to Picasso and Accident of Birth and Chemical Wedding, still pretty often.
Good. I haven't listened to those records in quite a few years, but the last time I did, it had been the first time in a long time, and I thought, wow, this stuff still sounds good. So especially the Chemical Wedding, that's by far, of the 3 records I did with Bruce, that's by far my favorite. So
yeah, it's a super record. Really love the tone, and like with a lot of my friends also, it seems to be maybe the favorite Bruce Dickinson album.
Nice.
Absolutely. So do you have basically somewhere, are you having some recording or practice facilities these days for the drums, or is it just basically do so often gigs Does it go there, or do you have some kind of like rehearsal space these days?
Yeah, that's a good question. For most of my years living out here in LA, I lived in houses. I'd always have at least one roommate, and so I was able to have a practice space. About 8 years ago, the house I'd been in for 10 years, it went up for sale, and my roommate of 10 years said, "Sorry, man, I'm going to move in with my girlfriend that is now his wife." So overnight, I was like in a panic, and I had to, for the first time living in LA for 34 years, I had to move into one bedroom apartment. So all of a sudden, practice space was gone. So I have a good friend who lets me practice in his studio about 10 minutes from here. But like you said, I'm playing so often that I really don't, my practice schedule isn't anything like it used to be when I was younger. I used to, woodshed for hours a week, and I really enjoyed it. And then you get to a point where you're gigging so much, I get off the road and I don't even want to look at drums. So, but, my band is, we're slowly but surely working on a new record right now. So I laid, I think, 5 or 6 drum tracks a few months ago. So I had to, go to the rehearsal studio, woodshed for that. But other than that, I mean, this band has been playing for so long, playing the same songs for so long that we don't really need to practice. We just played a 2-day festival in Reno, Nevada this last weekend. And it was the first gig we'd done in 3 weeks. And we got up there and, I was like, is this going to sound rusty or loose or raw? And it actually, I thought we sounded good. So that's, yeah. I guess we know what we're doing at this point.
Right, exactly. So if you think of very early days of you starting to play drums, was there some like a initial inspiration which got you into the drumming?
One of my best friends, actually 2 of my best friends, one of them had 2 drum sets in his basement. He didn't even play drums, but his mom owned drums. So I'd go down there and just be like, "Oh man, can I play your drums?" Every time I'd go over there, I'd annoy him. And then the other friend, we're kind of a circle of friends. He was a drummer. He had a drum set, and his older brother played in a band. So every time I'd see these drum kits, I was just, for some reason, I was just naturally drawn to that instrument. But I remember in 7th grade, 1977, I saw Kiss. That was my first concert. I saw Kiss at Olympia Stadium in Detroit. And I saw Peter Criss with, the giant riser and all the, explosions, flash pots. And I said, "That's it. That's what I want to do." I remember telling at dinner the next night, I said, "Mom, Dad, I want to be a drummer." And they're like, "Yeah, that's nice, Dave." Anyway, and I don't think they took me seriously. But I ended up actually, by my freshman year in high school, I joined a band through this class at the school. I can't remember what it's called, vocational music or something, and where you just get together and just say, "Hey, what style of music are you into?" You just basically throw together a band randomly. So that was my first experience playing in a band, and I didn't even own a drum set yet. I was basically using the bass player's younger brother's drums. And so I just kind of dove into it. I didn't have any lessons initially. I just sort of, just by listening to records and playing along, I was self-taught for the most part, and saved up for my first drums with a paper route. So, but I remember the first concert that particular band did. We did like a school assembly, and we did a couple of songs by Heart, and we did a Led Zeppelin song. Can't remember what it's called, and we did one Journey song, and that was the first time I'd ever performed in front of an audience. And I just remember the adrenaline rush from that, and I was hooked. I remember being on my paper route after that, and just like being so fired up from that experience, and that was it. I was hooked just on that the thrill of performance,
Right, exactly. Yeah, sounds pretty similar, kind of like as mine as well. So it sounds a bit like you were quite like starting quite late in the age, like in high school.
Yes, I've always been envious of drummers. You know, you hear some drummers, oh yeah, I started playing when I was 3. I'm like, screw.
Yes, exactly.
Can we swear on this podcast?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Whenever I hear that, I'm like, fuck you, buddy. You know, someone will say, oh yeah, both my parents were drums, and they gave me a drum set when I was 3. I'm just like, gee. But you know, I guess I was a bit of a late bloomer, and then to make it even more of a challenge for me, I didn't start taking lessons until around 22 or 23. And that was right before I moved out to LA and went to a musicians institute here in Hollywood. So that was, I had no formal training whatsoever until my mid 20s. So it was definitely a bit of a late bloomer. I mean, I was, the first Bruce record I played on, I was 29. So from about 25 years old till 29, I was just woodshedding, just because I had to make up for lost time. You know, when I moved out to LA, I sucked. I could barely play. But fortunately, I didn't realize how much I sucked. So I was very naive and very passionate. So I pursued it with all I had. But had I known just how bad I was, I probably would have just given up.
Right.
So,
exactly.
Sometimes ignorance is bliss, as they say, right?
Yes, that is sometimes the case. Which year was basically where you were at the Musicians Institute in Hollywood?
It's just a 1-year program, so it was 89, the fall of 89 through the fall of 90.
All right. Cool. So you might have crossed with my friend who also did a podcast, Heikki Varma. He also was at the Finnish guy. He came to like a Hollywood Musicians Institute. We talked about it in our podcast as well. So I think it was around the same years.
What's his name?
Heikki Varma.
Okay,
He's a guitar player.
Interestingly enough, I did play with I believe a Finnish guitar player named Peter that year, but I don't think it was the same guy. This guy was more of a jazz guy.
Okay, all right, cool. Yeah, interesting. Like possible like cross paths.
Yeah.
In people's lives. So so basically you're saying like the Peter Criss was the first kind of like a ignition to the dance.
Yeah, Peter Criss. I was into Kiss. I grew up in mid-Michigan, so mid-Michigan is like classic rock central, classic rock radio. That's all I listened to. So started off with Kiss and Angel and bands like that, and then eventually got into bands like Styx and REO Speedwagon, all the sort of classic rock schlock. Foreigner, bands that I don't really necessarily care for now, but at the time I loved it. And then my taste started to develop into what I consider a little hipper. I started getting into, Led Zeppelin, The Who, Pink Floyd. Yes, I was way into that stuff growing up. And then the closest I guess I would have gotten to metal is I was a huge, when Black Sabbath's Heaven and Hell record came out, that blew my mind. That was like a real life changer for me. And that was the first time I'd heard Ronnie James Dio. So I wore the grooves out on that record, and then eventually worked my way back. By the time I was a junior in high school, a good friend of mine turned me on to the old school Black Sabbath, like the first debut record. And so I got obsessed with old Sabbath. And, I was also into with Judas Priest live record. Is that Unleashed in the East? Does that sound right?
Might be so, yeah.
Anyways, they had a live record in the late 70s or early 80s that I really loved. But interestingly enough, that's about as metal as I got. Like, I didn't grow up listening to Iron Maiden. Both Roy and Eddie, by the time I joined the Tribe, both Roy and Eddie came from a Maiden background. They played Maiden cover bands and stuff like that. I was never really a Maiden guy. I knew of them, obviously, but it's just not the music I grew up listening to. And then I went from the sort of classic rock of the 60s and 70s to the Police. I became a massive Stuart Copeland fan. So, basically from Peter Criss to John Bonham and Neil Peart to Stuart Copeland. Once Stuart Copeland came along, that changed everything for me. So I still am a huge Stuart Copeland fan.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned the Tribe of Gypsies, so it's kept a little bit like a mystical band to me. I remember, back in the day reading about it, that was basically your group. So when you were playing with Bruce originally, so how did basically that Tribe of Gypsies thing got formed? What's the story behind that?
It was entirely Roy's project. He was a huge Santana fan, but coming from a metal background, he wanted to take those rhythms and make them heavier. So it was his concept, his idea. But it's interesting when I look back on my career, as limited of a career as it may have been, it all started at Musicians Institute. It was a classic example of, who and being in the right place at the right time. Because when I was at MI, I started playing with this bass player, Mike Renninger, and he and I became good friends. So we'd play in different classes at school. Once we graduated, he was already playing with this Latin pop band called Toro. So right when I get out of school, he says, "Hey, would you be interested in joining Toro? Our drummer just quit." And I was like, "Sure, absolutely." So I went straight from school to gigging, started playing the LA club scene. And then that band fizzled out within a year or so. But then shortly after, I got a call from Doug Van Boven, the percussionist, one of the first percussionists from Tribe of Gypsies. He was in Toro. So he calls me out of the blue and says, "Hey, man, I'm playing with this other Latin rock band now. You got to come down and audition." He says, "Wait till you hear this guitarist, man. This kid is amazing." So I was like, "Sure, man, why not?" So I come down and we jam, and sure enough, it was pretty. I wasn't necessarily blown away by all the music initially, but I could immediately tell Roy Z, this kid was, he had something going. So I was 27 at the time. Roy is younger than I'm not sure how many years, but so I was like, "Hey, I want to be part of this." I could just tell, like, this kid's going somewhere. So I was one of a few people to audition. I don't think Roy took to me immediately. I think he was sort of had his eye on this other guy. So both myself and this other guy came back for a second audition, and fortunately they chose me after that. So once again, it was just like going from one friend to a connection with another friend, and it was all just who I knew, and a lot of luck, And right. So that the same thing with the Dickinson gig. I mean, so much happened between the beginning of the Tribe and doing our first Dickinson record, but things started to really take off with the Tribe initially. Like early on, we were getting a lot of buzz around LA, and we were getting record company interest and all that. But then, almost as quickly as things started to. There was a lot of internal tension between the singer and Roy, because they were both leaders, and you can only have one leader in a band. So there's a lot of conflict. I won't get into the whole thing, but basically, at some point, Bruce was working with a producer that we were working with, a guy, Keith Olsen, I believe. And at some point, Keith said, "Hey, you got to check out this band I'm working with." He played Bruce some of the Tribe's material, and Bruce loved it. And he said, "Who's the main guy?" And he said, "This kid, Roy Z." So he gives Bruce Roy's contact information, and asked Roy, "Would you be interested in working with me on my next record?" And Roy basically said, "Well, if you're going to use me, you got to use my band." So right. That's how that came about. It's not that Bruce heard me and went, "Wow, that guy's amazing." He basically was given no choice. No, it was truly like Roy's just like, "Well, I'm not going to just bail on my band. So if you want to use me, you got to use my band." So Bruce agreed to it. And next thing I knew, I was being flown to London to record a record, So.
Right. Yeah. I'm
Interesting how
glad.
these things work, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think like well, needless to say, why we're here as well. Like your drumming really makes a difference on those records. You know,
Oh,
it's like
thank you. Thank you.
it's not like just like a background thing. It's like a really exceptional playing, and also like already on the post Picasso. Like I was also like a thing that okay, you know, it came in the something like middle of 90s, and it's like a still evolution of music and stuff, and like you know, and the record sounds and your playing sounds on that album so great. It's like I think like a super professionally played from the
Nice,
drums
nice.
perspective.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's interesting because that was, I think, only the second. I was very inexperienced at that point. I had done a Tribe record and a Tribe EP, I think, and that was about the extent of my studio experience. So that whole Balls to Picasso session, that whole experience was both thrilling and terrifying because I was so green. I didn't have a lot of studio experience at all. So I was thrilled to be there, and at the same time, I was just like, please, God, let me get through this. So I learned a lot just from that session alone. You know, as far as just like studio focus, you know, having to have that laser focus. But I think if anything, like I was never, like I said, I don't really come from a metal background, more of a classic rock background. So I think, well, obviously at that time, Bruce had just left Maiden. And so he was looking to try something different. So, you know, hence the idea of him hiring a Latin rock band. He was trying to get away from sort of stereotypical metal. So I think that's why that record worked. And then, of course, fast forward a few years, and he made the complete opposite choice and decided to go full on metal. And I think the timing of that it worked. You know, I think that was a wise choice. So it was Balls to Picasso. I actually like my drumming the best on the Chemical Wedding, but Balls to Picasso is probably closer to what I would consider my natural style. Where Accident of Birth and Balls to Picasso, I was literally like having to learn how to be a heavy metal drummer. I was sort of initially kind of faking it, you know, not really faking it, but that wasn't a style that necessarily came naturally for me. So I was like thrown in the deep end. I was like, all right, let's see if I can play some heavy metal here.
Right.
And I think the only reason I was able to keep that gig is because Nico McBrain doesn't play double bass, right? He's always been a single kick guy.
Yeah.
So had Bruce wanted a double kick drum player, I wouldn't have been able to do it. So I think that's the only thing that saved my ass, because most metal drummers are double kick guys, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's probably the secret choice to it, you know, and like and especially like I like you're playing the sense of style, and there is this like you know, this Latin kind of loose feel with you know with for example with the snare, kind of like you like to do this like a kind of back. I don't know what is basically exactly the technical routine of it, but like, you know, this kind of like when you're playing, you have this back kind of like a snare thing, which also like.
I know what you mean. I got that mostly, interestingly enough, I think I got that from listening to like funk drummers, you know?
Yes.
But it's interesting that you bring that up, because I think that was actually what made maybe my playing stand out a bit, is that I wasn't coming at it from a traditional metal angle or whatever. And I remember, I think it was in South America somewhere. I was talking to some fans after a show, and one of them said, "Drama, you played Power Slave like Chemical Brothers." And I was like, you know what? You're not wrong, because at that time, that's the sort of stuff I was listening to. I'd play a show with Bruce. I'd get on the tour bus and I'd put on my headphones. I'd listen to Chemical Brothers and Transglobal Underground and all these sort of 90s electronic artists. So that was subconsciously surfacing in my playing and in my approach to some of those songs. So even when we do Maiden songs, I would try to honor what Nico had done. You know, I didn't want to just show up and reinvent his parts. Obviously, that would be blasphemy from the perspective of Maiden fans. But you know, I try to learn it as close to how Nico did it, and then I try to put in my own spin. You know, so I think that's where those sort of offbeat, backbeat sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't even know what to call that, but
yeah, me neither. But that's the thing. And then I think also another part of your style, which also stuck to me, as I mentioned, I learned to play drums according to your Chemical Weddings, is like this, a little bit like a jumpy bass drum playing. You know, there's like this.
A what? Sorry.
A bit kind of like this. I don't know again how to call it, but like when you're playing the beats, which how I play nowadays is like that. The bass drum has all this kind of like, okay, in addition to the ones, you have this like a jumpy thing, like
sort of a galloping effect.
Yeah, kind of like that thing, which also like really has stuck to me as well. Like, and I think it just somehow works really well, and it fits to a lot of music, you know, to the metal and likely to the style of music which you've been playing in addition to the metal. It's like a little bit of this like a funky Latin groovy thing there with that snare. That combination is kind of like gives this like a loose, groovy kind of a flow to the beats.
Cool. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I think that was it all, you know, all the different influences came into play. I mean, obviously the Latin stuff was incorporated into that music, whether I was consciously doing it or not.
Yeah.
What's the song on Accident of Birth? Aquarius.
Dark Side of Aquarius. Yeah.
That's got that sort of kick drum pattern you're talking about.
And Trumpets of Jericho, for example, like
exactly. So that you know, if you were to strip away what's going on top, that particular pattern, I think it's like dotted quarter notes, dotted eighth notes, and a quarter note or something. That's basically a Latin sort of rhythm, you know, used in a lot of Afro-Cuban stuff, based on the bass line. So, you know, I was basically taking Tribe of Gypsy rhythms and sort of incorporating them into the Bruce stuff. But I wasn't, like I said, I wasn't doing it consciously. I wasn't trying to force that on the music. It's just that's what I felt the music called for. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So, do you remember, like, basically, did you say that you recorded the Paiste Picasso in London, or where?
Yes, and that was a really surreal experience because we recorded it at this old rundown studio that supposedly was the Who's studio where they recorded Tommy, you know, the legendary record Tommy. It was their old studio, and it was directly like if you walked out the front door and turned to the left, there was Battersea Power Station, which is the cover of Pink Floyd's Animals, you know, that old factory. So, you know, for a classic rock kid like myself who grew up listening to The Who and Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin, it was like surreal. It was like stepping into a dream, you know. And I grew up as a kid, I lived in London in 1972 as a kid, so I always wanted to go back, and I always kind of dreamed that one day my drumming might take me back to London. So here I was, and to make it even weirder, I was using that snare drum on Paiste Picasso. I don't actually care for the sound at all, but supposedly that was an old snare drum of John Bonham's. So we were at the rental gear place, and the rental guy said, "Oh yeah, this was an old snare drum of John Bonham's," and Bruce said, "We're going to use that." So the thing was a piece of shit. I mean, I'd get halfway through a take, and the lugs would start falling out of the bottom and stuff. I mean, it wasn't a very good snare, but there it is. It's all over the entire record. So I actually, the only song I didn't play on Paiste Picasso, as you probably know, is "Tears of the Dragon." And I actually prefer that drum sound. I think they got a better drum sound for that song. Now, would that drum sound have worked on the other songs? I don't know. Maybe the drum sound I had worked for those particular songs, but I think they got a fatter, fuller sound on Tears of the Dragon, but that's just
so
my.
you didn't play yourself the Tears
No,
of the
that's
Dragon
the
song?
one song on Balls to Picasso I didn't play. Tribe flew home and they did that session separately. It was
Okay.
some guy, Dickie something. He was a friend of Bruce's, and I think Bruce wanted to use him for one song or something. I don't
Okay.
remember the whole story behind it.
All right. Okay. Do you remember? Did you basically record that album with a click or without click, or like, or did you play
Oh
it
yeah,
also like as a band?
the entire thing is click. I
Right.
prefer playing to a click because
Okay.
it's one less thing to worry about. You know, if you if I know if I'm playing to a click, I can just focus on the feel and execution and the arrangement. I don't have to worry about tempo. If you take that click away, there's a good chance I'm going to speed up halfway through the song. So,
Yeah, of course.
but I've grown to. I've actually learned to. I've learned to play really well with a click. The problem is playing without one. That's the real challenge, because like I say, it's most drummers tend to speed up, it's at some point in the song. So,
Sure.
and I'm no exception. So,
Yeah. Right. So did you basically play them all separately as you were doing it with click, or still with like with along with the bass at the same time recording?
Oh.
Or
Good question. For that particular record, I think, God, I can't even remember. I think Roy and Eddie were in the control room playing, and I just played along. Obviously had them in my cans. I don't remember anyone being in the room with me. I don't think we were jamming as a band.
Yeah.
And then I think Doug overdubbed his percussion later. With Accident of Birth and Chemical Wedding, I think it was just Roy and I. I think Roy was sitting there, just literally sitting in a chair at Sound City, banging out, strumming out his parts, and I'm just playing along with a click and him. So
Right.
I actually prefer it that way because I can really just kind of focus on my part, and I don't have to worry about if someone else fucks up. It's like it's more about just nailing the drum track.
Exactly. Yeah. Do you remember how long a session was it basically for the Paiste Picasso recordings in the studio?
Ah, man, I don't remember. So long ago.
Yeah.
We probably finished the drums within a week, I'd say. Maybe we were doing 2 songs a day. Maybe a few days we did 3. I don't think we did more than. I'm certain we wouldn't have done more than 3 songs in a day. So it's probably
Right.
2 songs a day.
Yeah.
But like I say, it was a long time ago.
Right. Exactly. So you didn't basically then play live with for the Paiste Picasso, you were the Tribe of Gypsies group.
Yeah, that once again, I don't remember exactly what happened. I know a lot was happening for the Tribe at that time. We were signing a record deal around the same time Bruce was. We were both getting signed to Mercury Records, I think. So there was a lot of stuff happening for the Tribe at that point. So we did that record, but then we said, "Sorry, Bruce, we're not actually going to be able to tour this." So that's when he got what ended up being the Skunk Work guys.
Yeah, exactly.
But then, a few years passed, and whatever the stuff that was happening for the Tribe kind of fell through. We ended up signing a record deal, then we lost the record deal, and we ended up signing a Japanese record deal, and a bunch of shit went down. But so by the time Bruce approached us for Accident of Birth, we weren't doing a whole lot. We're like, let's do it.
Yeah.
So
exactly. Yeah. Do you remember what about then the Accident of Birth recordings? Were they also done in London or?
No, those were actually done here at the legendary Sound City studio. It's only about 15 minutes from where I live. Legendary old studio where a bunch of big records have been done, like classic Fleetwood Mac records, Chili Pepper records, Tom Petty. I think the first Rage Against the Machine record was done there. So it's a really famous room. And so when you're there, you feel like you're on hallowed ground almost. You walk through the main corridor and you see all these gold records hanging on the wall of just really legendary artists and legendary records. So you feel when you're in that room recording, you feel like you really have to kind of rise to the occasion. And then I think Sound City went under briefly, and somebody bought it again and revived it. So
Okay.
it's back again. As a matter of fact, U2 just did a new single that came out a few weeks ago for that Sphere show in Vegas, and they recorded in Sound City. So that was their first time in Sound City.
Right. Yeah. I think I saw some documentary, some very well produced documentary recently, some years
exactly.
ago.
It's actually called Sound City.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Dave Grohl actually ended up with the original mixing board, console, whatever you call it. He when Sound City went under, he bought it because it was such a legendary console, and then they brought the studio back. So obviously they have a different recording console now. But I think Dave Grohl has that in his own home studio. So the console that we did those records on.
Exactly. Yeah. So in this studio, then you were able to bring your own drums.
Yes, that was my own drums. Since it was done in LA, I could bring my own drums. We didn't have to use rental. We did rent some extra snare drums, just so we'd have different choices. But the main setup was mine.
Right. Did you at the time? I think if I recall, I'm not sure. Do I recall right? But you were playing with Premier drums.
No, actually, I was touring with Premier drums.
Exactly.
When we
That's
would do those tours.
Picture,
Sanctuary had some rental company that they would use, and Premier just happened to be the drums they had. So they said, "Are you okay with that?" I was like, "Whatever, that's fine." But that's not what I owned or recorded with.
Okay, what kind of drums were you using
the first Accident of Birth was my old Tama kit, which was the first professional drum set I owned. And then by the time we were doing Chemical Wedding, I was using Pork Pie, which is what I have now. It's a custom, like, boutique drum shop here in the valley where I live. Bill Dedamore, he runs Pork Pie drums, and they're amazing, beautiful sounding drums. And so that's what I used for that particular record.
Right. What about then the cymbals? Was it also like at least I think I got the picture from the live things, but I think you were using Paiste cymbals.
Yep, I got a deal with Paiste. I've been using them for most of my life. When I did, I can't remember. Actually, no. For Balls to Picasso, once again, since it was a rental kit, I was using Zildjian for that. Zildjian A Customs, I think, were most of that. And for Accident of Birth, it was kind of a mishmash of different types of cymbals because I hadn't gotten a deal with Paiste yet. So I had like Paiste hi-hats, but maybe a Zildjian ride and a few other things. By the time I was doing Chemical Wedding, it was entirely Paiste, and I've used nothing else since.
Do you remember like more of the specific brands of the? I mean, like the lineups of the
models
cymbals.
or whatever. God, it was too long ago. I mean, I think I had for years and years I had some old 2002 Sound Edge, like 14-inch Sound Edge hi-hats. I think I used those on both Accident of Birth and Chemical Wedding. Now I have a pair of 15-inch 2002 medium hats, which I love, really love. God, the rest of the setup, the crashes were pretty large. I think I had a 19-inch and an 18-inch, but God, what they may have been Signature Series. Really don't remember.
As you said, like you were playing with a click, and at least I see, at least when I've been seeing your live performance, you tend to play always with like timekeeping with the hi-hat as well. Like, you know, when you're playing the beats, is that something that you do?
You mean with
always?
that left foot?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's actually. I used to. It's interesting. I when I would play syncopated 16th note patterns with my kick drum, like let's say Laughing in the Hiding Bush, the chorus for Laughing in the Hiding Bush is a very syncopated sort of rhythm. The only way I could actually execute those rhythms was by subdividing eighth notes with my left foot. I don't know, I can't really explain why, but that was the only way I could really do that. I can't really do it anymore because I'm getting old and banging out eighth notes with my left foot all the time. It started throwing my back out because I wasn't, when if your left foot's still and you're just using your right foot, you're propping yourself up with your left foot. Some of the balance is there, where when both feet are going like that, you're basically just sitting on your spine. So as I started getting older, that started becoming harder and harder. So I don't know if I could even play some of those beats anymore. I mean, it was I had a very different approach to how I was executing those ideas, and so nowadays I'm like, man, like I say, the last time I listened to those records, it was a while ago, but I was listening, I was like, God, I don't know if I could even play that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
There's a few things like that. God, I can't remember what the song is. What's the song on Chemical Wedding that goes?
That's the Trumpets of Jericho.
Yeah, Trumpets of Jericho. There's that breakdown where it goes back to the intro, and I play some like over the bar line fill going back into the verse, like.
Yeah.
I don't even know what the hell I did there. I listened to it. I honestly don't even remember. Like if I had to learn that again, I don't even remember how I played that. And I played it every night live, and I still can't remember what I did. That's how long ago it was. But
exactly.
I'm different style of drummer now. I've been playing in Irish rock, for better or for worse. It's 4 on the floor. Like it's a lot of the music is like sort of train beat, like or like triplet sort of stuff. A lot of snare stuff, but it's all just 4 on the floor. Boom, 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 boom. So a lot of that syncopation I had when I was younger, I've lost it, man. I got like caveman leg from just going thud, thud, thud for 24 years. So it's, I think in some ways I'm a better drummer. Like I think my time is better, and I don't hit necessarily. I used to hit harder than I even needed to. And, I'd get halfway through a tour and my hands were just killing me. I've learned to pull a good sound out of the drums without having to hit as hard. But in other ways, I think I was a better drummer back then, or at least I was capable of certain things back then that I don't know if I could even play anymore.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty like intricate stuff, like, with the left leg timekeeping, which you had like, in those, for example, Book of Tales mid part, there's like a lot of like those highlight fill parts, and also in the Trumpets of Jericho mid part, which I also like often come to even to play those things in the rehearsal room because they are so fun things to play, and like it's really intricate stuff which you played there. So it's like after me, even though I've been like sometimes always getting back to those highlight fills of yours of those songs and playing them just for fun, it's like it's still hard to basically pull them off rhythmically exactly, and with the kind of like trying to play it with the same kind of feel which you had with the intricate like left foot basically counting there and like doing them all smooth. So it's like it's really great like a performance on those records. For example, for those couple of songs in the middle parts, it's like it's pretty amazing drumming.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But that's the funny thing is I wasn't doing that to be intentionally complicated or anything. I actually had to do that. That was the only way I could play that stuff. So for some people it may seem challenging, but that was like the only way I could execute those ideas by keeping that left foot going. So
they are pretty like a really cool beats, and like and rhythmically quite challenging to nail exactly. Like those mid part sections of those, particularly those two songs with all their feels, like it's really cool stuff.
Right on. Yeah, those were challenging songs. Really challenging live too. My favorite sort of stuff to play with Bruce. Well, Laughing in the Hiding Bush was one of my favorites, but just because it was really kind of funky. That chorus has a funkiness to it. Roy's a real master of like syncopated offbeat sort of guitar riffs. But one of my all-time favorites was the Chemical Wedding. I love playing those sort of halftime, John Bonham sort of grooves. I mean, when I played that song, I was basically thinking of Zeppelin's When the Levee Breaks, So I love playing those sort of grooves because you can sit back on it more. You can relax. It's not so rushed and on top of the beat, So I used to love playing Chemical Wedding live. That's a really fun song. Yeah.
Yes, and like the main beat of basically the theme beat of the Chemical Wedding song is like it was one of those first beats I ever learned to play, and it like basically covers the basic like rhythm like challenges, coordinations, what you need as a drummer. So basically, it was a really great like song to learn, because like if you learn that song and those beats which you do and like the hand and bass drum combinations, then you're able to basically play 90% of music which is brought to you, kind of like it kind of covers the basics of the the coordination things, that certain beat.
Nice. I never really thought of it that way, but
yeah, to me as well, like otherwise as well, that Chemical Wedding, it's like a kind of like to me it's like a ABC of like heavy metal drumming with good sense of style, as you did it. I've been basically calling it like that often.
Nice.
And also like when I was starting, like it covers also the Trumpets of Jericho. It covers those double bass basic like patterns as well. So
yeah. Well, Trumpets of Jericho, that was an example of where it required double bass, but I didn't know how to. Like I said, I didn't play double kick, so I had to get a floor tom to my left, and on that intro that we were talking about, the digga digga digga, it's hard for me to describe here on a podcast, but the second 16th note, I'm hitting floor tom to my left.
Okay.
So it's like one E and so that was my me trying to make up for the fact that
it was well made up for that.
I was basically faking it,
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it sounds like I think I remember when I was listening to it like that. Are you playing it with both feet, or what is going on? But still, like of course, I then played it with the double pedal. But is it then also like when you start the beat, like the do you still play that as well as faked, kind of like a?
You mean the floor tom?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going one E and a 2. God, I can't even remember.
Okay.
Yeah, every second 16th note is the floor tom. So the kick drums.
So you do that as well there, right?
Kick drums just going one and a da 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 da. So
yeah,
that was the only way I could pull it off.
All right, cool. Well, it was very well faked, because I was kind of like I heard it like as a double bass, and then learned it with the double bass, and it was good exercise.
Nice. Yeah, to this day I can't play double kick. Never bothered to learn. I think if to play double kick, you have to grow up listening to double kick drummers. But like I say, all my main influences, for the most part, like John Bonham, Stuart Copeland, they were all single kick guys. So I never really got that into double kick.
Right.
I was a Neil Peart fan. He played some double kick, but for the most part, I was listening to single kick players. So
exactly.
And I'm still trying to figure out how to play the kick drum. So I figure once I've mastered the single kick, maybe I'll move on to double.
Right. But then I guess there's like basically the other side of the coin. Then you are stronger likely with your one foot, because you needed to basically come up with these things and you played a lot with it. Not basically then using like a second leg to kind of like compensate some fast things. You need to come up with ways.
Yeah. You have to improvise and figure it out, and fast.
Yeah. Exactly. So you then, as also mentioned, that you played that in Finland as well with the Chemical Wedding tour. Do you have any basically memories of those Finnish gigs?
I only remember. I don't remember. Did we do more than one? I only remember
You did.
one.
I think you played 3 shows or something like this.
I don't recall. I remember one gig. It was this kind of small room, like glass windows. Kind of, I don't remember. Not that it matters. I remember taking a walk out in some Finnish woods, and I remember being in a bar and some big lug of a guy just bumped into me, and I was like, you know what? I know not all Finnish people are total assholes like that guy, so I'm not going to hold it against the Finnish. But, that's about it. You know, those tours were they were kind of a big blur. You know, I have certain memories, really strong memories, and then some of it is just like people tell me something I did or a show I played. And I was like, really? I have no recollection of being there.
Right.
So, like Copenhagen, I've been to Copenhagen a bunch of times with Young Dubliners, but I know I played there with Bruce, and I remember the city, but I don't remember the gig at all. Unless something unusual happened, unless there's something about the gig that makes it stand out, then they all just kind of blurred together,
Yeah.
you know.
Right.
I remember playing a show in Detroit, and some of my family came to that. That was for the Accident at Birth tour, and some guy hopped up on stage and fell off, and they had to like pause the show and call an ambulance or something. So yeah,
Nice.
I remember that. I remember playing Barcelona, Spain, where Bruce got in a fight with someone. Someone threw a beer in Bruce's face. He jumps in the audience and gets in a brawl. So I'm up there drumming away, and next thing I know, the whole band stopped. I'm like, what's happening? So, and I think Bruce kind of got his ass kicked. Actually, he didn't take into account that this guy who threw the beer in his face was with his friend. So Bruce hops in the audience, and these guys just start wailing on him. And he gets back on the stage, and and says, "Next time I'll really show you." And we finished the show, and the next day Bruce could barely sing. I mean, he had like bruised ribs. So, I remember gigs like that. I remember the Japanese gigs because Japan was such an unusual place. I've never been somewhere where I felt so far from home. Japan was like being on another planet. So I remember those. But a lot of the gigs just it's all a big blur.
Yeah. Still about the Chemical Wedding, I really like also like the drum sounds, as I guess you also mentioned you like the drum sounds on that record. Do you remember which snare was that? Was it a metal snare or?
Oh, like I said, we used multiple snares for that record.
All right.
I mean, we had my snare, my pork pie snare, and I think I had 2 of them. But then we had some rental snares, and they were all lined up behind me. So we'd record one song with one snare, and then we'd think, okay, the next song, we'd pick a snare that we thought would, work best for that particular song. And sometimes it was a good choice, sometimes it wasn't. We actually, speaking of the Chemical Wedding, that song, we went for a lower sort of Phil Rudd, AC/DC, thuddy snare. And in retrospect, I don't think it was the right choice because once Roy layered his wall of guitars, I mean, you know how it is. Certain frequencies fight it out. Cymbals tend to clash with guitars and vice versa. I think we used this kind of low-tuned thuddy snare, and I think it gets buried in the mix. I think had we used a tighter, more cracky popping snare for Chemical Wedding, I think it would have sat better in the mix. But this minor technicalities is not something I really am that concerned about. But as far as specific snare drums, I couldn't tell you what we used. It was a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, the album starts great with your very simple feel of hitting the snare drum and bass drum and the snare drum for which was the first song? God damn it, which one was it called? I know the song.
Oh yeah,
I remember.
yeah. I can't remember the name of that song either.
But when you do it, there's no guitar ruining the
Oh yeah,
snare hit. So,
exactly. So that's how it works. When you hear the instrument on its own, it's like, oh, that sounds great, and then you pile the guitars on, and all of a sudden it disappears. But that's just the way.
Yeah,
that's just the way it works.
Yeah, I could think like it's a really great way to start and really cool feel and just super simple playing, but like with just such a great sense of style that it's fucking murders.
Yeah, it's nice. Yeah, I remember we used to, for that tour, I think we started, was that the second song? I think we started with Trumpets of Jarkko, and then we went into that, or maybe it was the other way around. I don't remember. But yeah, it was a fun way to start a show. I know that.
And that was basically the last album then, which you did and tour with Bruce. Was that so?
Yeah, we did that final South American tour where we recorded "Scream for Me" Brazil, live record, which I don't think is necessarily that great a record. Some of the playing's okay, some of it not so much. But by that point we knew Bruce and Adrian were going to rejoin Maiden, so we pretty much knew this is it, and then Roy and Eddie kind of had a falling out by the end of that tour. I don't remember what it was over. I think it was just sort of years of sort of butting heads. But by the end of that, Eddie was done. He quit the Tribe of Gypsies. So next thing I knew, it was just Roy and I. Roy and I were the only remaining original members. We had a totally different lineup. So I played with that. I continued to play with the Tribe for about another year before I got the call for the audition for Young Dubliners. And so, basically when I got off the road with Bruce, I had gotten, bitten by the touring bug. I mean, as a kid, I'd always wanted to tour. I'd always dreamed of like traveling the world playing music. And so with Bruce, I finally realized that dream, and then it was over. And I was like, oh, I want more, so the Tribe wasn't really doing much. Roy's production career was taking off, and I was happy for him because he deserved it. He'd earned it. But he was like started working with Rob Halford, and the Tribe wasn't doing much. So I'm just like, at some point I had to think, what about me? Like, what's the next chapter of my life here, my career? So I got that call from the Young Dubliners, and I thought, I'll give this a year or so. And, what happened is I went on their website. I wasn't that convinced I was going to audition, but I went to their website and I saw their tour schedule, and I was like, these guys are a hard-working road band. I was like, that's what I want to do. So I joined them, and then, I don't remember how many years passed, and Roy's like, hey, Dave, Bruce is talking about making another record. You better like plug back in and stay in touch with him. Otherwise he might use someone else. And at that point I was just like, you know what? I can't, I'd committed to this band, and I couldn't just keep, quitting and stop. The thing with the Dickinson gig, and I'm not complaining because it was a great experience, but, basically you would work, you'd make a record, you'd make however much money, and then you'd sit around and watch your bank account dry up, and then you'd be broke again, and then, oh, we're going on tour, and you'd be a rock star for a few months, and then you'd go home and watch the bank account dry up again. And I just got tired of like on, off, so once I landed a steady working gig where I was basically touring all year long, I couldn't walk away from it. So, for me to do another Bruce record, I would have had to just tell the guys, sorry, I'm going to bail and do this record and maybe tour. But, I want to come back, make sure my gig's still available. And they'd be like, fuck off, we're going to replace your ass. So it just reached a point where I just thought, you know what, this is a new chapter. I've got a steady gig, and I can't really afford to just walk away from it. So that was when they did Tyranny of Souls, I think.
Yeah.
So Bruce got a different drummer for that. And then even this most recent record, in 2018, obviously a little while before the pandemic, Roy and Eddie and I got together for the first time in years and years, and we got together at Roy's, and we talked about the possibility of doing another Bruce record. And it was an appealing idea, but the problem is, to do it, we would have had to put the Tribe back together and go off on some tours for little to no money, which would have meant me leaving my present band and locking myself away in a practice room and woodshedding these old Latin rhythms that I hadn't played in 25 years. And I was just like, man, I don't think I can do that, and I'm just at a different place in my life now. So I was like, man, do I really want to go backwards and start like playing this music from like my ancient past? So by the end of the evening, by the end of the conversation, I was just like, guys, I don't think I can do this. But even then, Roy had discussed the possibility of Eddie and I playing on a couple tracks on the new record. And then that didn't materialize for whatever reason. So, I know a lot of Maiden / Bruce fans would have maybe liked to hear the old lineup together, but it's just too much time has passed, so I'm at a different place in my life. I'm just like, do I really want to play heavy metal at 58 years old? And like I said, I don't think I could play that music the same way anymore. So I'm like, you know what, let a younger drummer take that gig, Yeah. But then, admittedly, I saw that Adrian's going to be joining Bruce next year, and I was like, oh, damn it, that because I always loved Adrian. Adrian and I got along great, and I saw some of the tour dates. I was like, oh, Mexico City, damn it, because that gig is going to go off. Same with, like, I think they're doing Sao Paulo and some other parts of Brazil. So there's a side of me that's a little jealous and thinks, man, that would have really been a lot of fun. And then the other side of me is like, nope. I don't want to go back to trying to play that stuff at almost 60 years old.
Yeah, exactly. And just came to my mind, like, in that gig which I visited at the Chemical Wedding tour, there was a replacement at that gig for it was Guru, guy called Guru.
Oh yeah, you remember that? That's right.
Yeah.
So those Finland gigs would have been with Guru, right? The Guru.
Right.
Yeah, I had totally forgotten about that. Roy, I think Roy's mom was really sick at the time or something, so he couldn't do that particular tour. He did South America with us. But yeah, that whole European tour, Roy couldn't make it. So yeah, that was a challenge because Guru, he was I can't even remember his real name. It's funny. I haven't seen that guy in decades. But he was a really talented guitarist. He just wasn't Roy. So when he'd play the actual parts, he did a great job. But when he would solo, sometimes it was a little hit or miss. He had his own take on soloing, and sometimes it was. I think he was into this weird like quarter tone sort of thing, where sometimes he'd be. It sounded like he was playing out of key, and Bruce would be like, "Stop that! Why are you playing out of key?" And he'd be like, "No, man, I'm not out of key. That's a quarter tone or something." It's just like, dude, that's not working. So I don't think Bruce and Adrian were particularly happy with Guru, but he did the best job he could. He for him to step into Roy's shoes, that's not easy. So
yeah, true. So yeah, and you are very much into photography, which I discovered then later on.
Yeah,
were you already doing when you were doing the the gigs there? Were you already doing photography around those tours? And
yes, I've been into photography ever since I was a kid. but I was always doing it just sort of a way of like most people, just kind of documenting my life. I have a few stacks of photo albums from those tours, but as a kid, documenting family vacations and holidays and stuff. It wasn't until I talked about being a late bloomer as a drummer. I was even a later bloomer as a photographer. It wasn't until my mid 30s, a few years after playing with Bruce, that I started to take photography more seriously. And I built a darkroom in my home. And then it wasn't until I got my first iPhone that I got really obsessed, because I'd been looking for a smaller, more compact camera. I was tired of dragging camera gear all over the world, having various lenses in my baggage. And so I was looking for a smaller camera. I got my first iPhone, and for the first time ever, I had something where I could shoot and process and post all just from the palm of my hand. And that was revolutionary. We already take these smartphones for granted, but at the time, it was an amazing, revolutionary invention. And, these things called apps, it wasn't that long ago that apps didn't even exist. So I got completely obsessed with the iPhone, and I got totally obsessed with mobile street photography. So for a good decade or so, I was just, I'd be touring with a band, I'd come home, and I'd just walk away from the drums entirely and just focus on photography. So I obsessed over that for 10 to 12 years. And then I started to kind of hit a wall. I started to kind of burn out, and I put out a book of my work, which kind of represented that chapter. And I was selling it through my website, and then COVID hit. So when COVID hit, I completely stepped away from photography, because I had relied on the metro here in LA, to get around the city, because it's such a huge city. It's like, where do you even begin? So, and if you try to drive to places, you'll spend half the day in traffic. So I would use the metro as a way to focus on particular spots. I'd say, okay, today I'm just going to go to Hollywood and Vine, and I'm going to get off at that stop and just maybe explore the square mile of that area. And then the next week I'd say I'm going to get off at Santa Monica and whatever. Well, COVID hits, and I'm like, I'm not getting on a fucking metro with a pandemic. I felt like I was begging to get COVID. So I basically stepped away from photography for a good year and a half to 2 years for the most part. And now I'm having trouble getting back into it. So it's interesting. I feel like I'm sort of in a limbo stage photographically. But what did happen is during that same period of lockdown, I was getting very creatively antsy. I wanted to be doing something. So I set up a little mini recording studio in my living room, a little MIDI recording studio, and started working on my own music for the first time since my 20s. So that's been my main creative focus at this point. I'm basically slowly working on my first solo record of, believe it or not, ambient electronic music.
Cool.
No heavy metal whatsoever. Sorry to disappoint anyone out there, but
not a bad. I also like a lot of ambient, kind of electronic ambient music.
Nice.
Very addicted.
So very kind of atmospheric, spacey. I'm programming all the drums. It's all virtual. I'm just using samples and plugins, and I don't think there's a single audio track on any of my stuff. It's all just virtual, and I enjoy working that way. I can be working on music at 4 a.m, and I don't have to worry about playing, annoying my neighbors playing the drums, or it's been very therapeutic. So who knows? Maybe I work at a very slow pace, especially with the band schedule. So check back with me in a year. I might be ready to release a record.
Right, exactly. Be interesting to hear that thing. Is there in the realm of photography? Did you say that you are you shooting now? I see you have the Instagram account and those photos. Is basically film camera stuff
No, that is entirely iPhone. That's all.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
All
it's
iPhone.
all black and white street photography done with the iPhone. All
Okay.
shot and processed in the iPhone.
Ah, all right. Processed as well. So you don't process them with Lightroom or maybe on phone.
No, I used to like I say, I used to, I'd travel with a SLR or whatever, and then I'd have to transfer the photos to my laptop, and then I'd, convert or process them in Photoshop. Now I do it all on my phone. I use Snapseed. I don't know if you know that
Okay.
app.
Yeah, I know.
And yeah, it's a real simple workflow. And like I say, I just shoot, process, and post all from the iPhone. I don't even have to have a laptop anymore for the photography.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds like a minimalistic, compact way to work.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you had also like this book which you have published recently.
Yes,
What's that called?
Lonesome City. It's called. It's available through my website, and yeah, like I say, it kind of represents that particular chapter where I was really fired up and I think doing the best work that I'd done up to that point. So it's a good representation of that particular period of work. Yeah. So, but yeah, davidingram.com. If anyone's interested in checking out a copy, it's still available. You can get a signed copy.
Is there some sort of like you mentioned it's like this ambient electronic music? Do you have some of like bands like of that style which have inspired you or which you could recommend?
Yeah,
Me to check out?
good question. Because I'm listening to a lot of obscure ambient artists these days. That most, if I named them, I guarantee you wouldn't have heard of them. But
Well, that's even better.
yeah, exactly. But I've actually got a list here. I mean, obviously there's some Radiohead influence. Brian Eno, Daniel Lanois, The Orb. But other than that, it's mostly just obscure artists like Deep Chord and Snuff Mum Rico, who's a brilliant ambient artist somewhere in your part of the world. I can't remember exactly where he is. I can't remember if he's Swiss or Danish or something. Anyway, John Hopkins, he's a really brilliant electronic artist who's really inspired me. Burial, I don't know if you're familiar with Burial.
No. Yeah.
Olafur Arnold, do you know who he is? He's an Icelandic,
Okay.
really brilliant Icelandic kind of ambient artist. Rival Consoles, like I said, I could go on. It's
Yeah.
very obscure influences, because
Yeah.
I'm getting further and further as I get old. Not older. I was getting older in my 40s. I'm getting old now. As I get old, I'm getting further and further away from mainstream music. I'm just not really getting that inspired by what I hear in the mainstream anymore. So I'm getting more and more into just obscure artists that, like I say, most people haven't really heard of. I'm convinced we are at a low point in popular music history. I just think it's the digital revolution, I think, is not entirely, but largely killed music. Because, nowadays you don't even have to learn an instrument, so the days of like really honing your craft on an instrument and the days of bands working together and, playing together for years to develop a style and stuff. I don't know. I don't really hear that anymore. It's nowadays it seems to be like single artists just playing, music made on their laptop, which I have nothing against that. It's just, it doesn't seem, nowadays it seems like you don't even have to have any musical training to make music, So I feel like, I don't know, I turn on the radio and I'm just like, if this is what's popular, no thanks.
Right.
So I just find myself going further and further off into a whole different world, musically.
Yeah. Are you, by the way, these days still in touch with the Roy Z and those guys? Do they live like around you there?
Relatively speaking, yeah. He's in Silmar. I'm in Northridge. Obviously, you don't know where that is, but it's all generally the same part of LA. I'm in the San Fernando Valley, and Roy is just another 25 minutes north of me. And Eddie, I think, is also somewhere nearby, but I haven't spoken to Eddie since, like I say, 2018 when we got together. Right. But we're all still in the LA area. I speak to Roy occasionally on social media, but he and I don't really get a chance to hang out much. Which I'd like to. I'd love to see Roy again. I always loved Roy. We got along great, but our lives kind of went two different directions, as it does. So, I'd love to hang out with Roy again sometime. So, and I'm sure next year I'll be seeing him on stage with Bruce on social media, playing some of these amazing shows that I'm jealous I won't be part of. But
exactly. So hey, I think we could be wrapping this up. So thanks a lot, man, for doing this. It was really cool to meet you after first me learning to play drums along to your music, and now meeting you.
Well,
much appreciated.
I'm flattered. I'm glad that glad my drumming was inspiring for you, and I'm glad that those records were as influential as they were. It's like I say, at the time I didn't really think about that, but
exactly.
A couple decades later, I'm happy to hear that those records have really kind of stood the test of time. So
exactly. So thanks a lot, man, for this, and maybe we'll catch up sometime later again.
All right. Nice talking to you. Enjoy your long Finnish winter.
Yes, long days starting now from this. So we'll see you maybe someday. So thanks a lot, man.
Sounds good.
All right.
Take it easy.